She disappeared after a normal night out. Days later, her phone began to ring. Not once, not twice. Repeated calls. A familiar voice on the line that didn't sound quite right. Short, controlled, as if every word had a weight on it. Then a final call. And after that, only silence. This is the story of Frauke Liebs, told as it happened. The last night, the voice on the phone, and the questions that still won't let go. Frauke was a young woman in Germany, finishing her training and planning the kind of future that doesn't need headlines. Friends, work, late buses, a small nightlife that felt safe enough to be ordinary. On the day she vanished, she met friends, laughed, and stayed out just long enough for the walk home to feel colder than usual. There was nothing remarkable about the evening, until it became the last evening anyone saw her. The walk back is where the timeline fractures. She left a bright space for a dark one, the streetlights thinning, the sounds getting smaller, the distance between places growing longer. It is the kind of shift you only recognize in hindsight, when you are sitting at a table with a map and a pen, drawing the route and circling the places where something could have happened. Hours pass, morning arrives. She doesn't come home. The first calls go unanswered, then ring to voicemail. Worry grows slowly, then sharply. Friends remember the last words said at the bar, the way the night ended, the way people parted at the door, promising to text later. Later never arrives. Then the phone rings. Her family hears her voice. It is hers, but also not. It's shorter, tighter. She says just enough to prove it's her and not enough to explain where she is. She sounds tired, or careful, or both. The call ends before anyone can pin down the difference. The days that follow are not the normal days people imagine when they think of a missing person. There are calls and messages. There is movement suggested by cell data and by time. Signals that seem to come from one place and then another, as if the story itself is traveling. Sometimes the calls say, "Don't worry." Sometimes they say, "I'm fine." But behind those words there is a different message, unspoken and heavy. This is all I can say. People cling to what they hear in those moments, the exact words, the tone, the pauses, the small sounds in the background that might be a clue, a door, a car, a voice that doesn't speak but still exists. Families learn to listen the way investigators do. They learn to hear what was not said. The first official searches run like a template. Talk to friends, retrace steps, compare accounts. The last sightings are gathered and written down. The route home is walked again in daylight, then in evening light, to see what is visible and what is not. Investigators ask the questions that are always asked in cases like this. Did she agree to a ride? Did she know someone who lived along the way? Did anyone notice a car stopped where no car should be? Meanwhile, the calls continue. The pattern is its own kind of evidence, a voice that sounds familiar but careful, a choice of words that feels learned or rehearsed. Some calls happen at hours that don't fit. Some end earlier than they should, like a line pulled from the wall. There is one more call, the last one. It is short. It carries the shape of a farewell without using the word. After this, the phone stops speaking. Weeks become months. Then there is a discovery outside the city, off a smaller road, in a place that is not quite hidden but not meant to be found quickly. Time has done its work. The answers everyone wanted are replaced by the answers that time allows. It is Frauke. The cause of death is not clearly written in the marks that remain. The questions that mattered on day one still matter now. The call was real. The voice was real. But what did those calls mean? At this point, the story divides into theories. Each one makes a promise to explain the cause, the movement, and the final discovery. Each one comes with its own shadows. The first theory says she was taken by someone who wanted to manage the narrative. The calls were not a mercy, but a technique. Reduce the pressure, calm the search, create a sense of normal distance. The voice continues because the voice is useful. When it isn't useful anymore, it stops. The second theory says the caller was someone she knew, or thought she knew. Someone who could speak to her in a way that carried both familiarity and control. The calls buy time. They also buy confusion. By the time the pattern is understood, the pattern is finished. A third theory points to a person with experience. Someone who has done this before, or thought about it for a very long time. The detail that stands out is not the calls themselves, but the timing of the calls. Enough to create hope, never enough to create a clear trail. The goal is not to be believed. The goal is to be doubted for just long enough. There is also a more fragile theory, that the calls were a negotiation. Not with police, not with the public, but between fear and the will to survive. Say what you must to make it to tomorrow. Use the words they want to hear. Make them believe the day will be normal again. When you listen to the recordings in your mind, you can hear both the person you love and the person trying to stay alive at the same time. What keeps the case unresolved is not a single missing element, but a stack of them. The space between where she was last seen and where she was found. The gap between what the calls seemed to promise and what the calls actually did. The distance between the life she planned and the place where it ended. Cold cases do not stay cold because people stop caring. They stay cold because the facts we need to connect don't exist in one place. Technology changes that picture, but only in steps. Signals can be mapped more precisely now than they could then. Timelines can be drawn with tighter edges. Data that was once kept in separate rooms can be put on the same table. Even so, a timeline is a portrait with missing lines. It looks like a person but does not have a name for the expression on their face. When people talk about Frauke's case, they return to the phone. The device is both ordinary and impossible. It lets the missing be present in brief, supervised moments. It lets families hope at the exact pace that hope can hurt. A ring, a voice, a word chosen because another word is not allowed. I'm fine. Don't worry. Soon. You can draw the waveform of hope and see the points where it crests and breaks. If you pull back from the timeline and look at the structure, you see something important. The last night out is the point of departure. The calls are the middle, a controlled narrative that looks like reassurance but feels like restriction. The discovery is not an ending. It is the point at which the visible story ends and the invisible one, the part no one heard on the phone, refuses to show itself. Why does this story stay with people? Because it is built from things that should make us feel safe. Friends. A familiar street, a phone that can reach you anywhere. And because in this case each of those things appeared, and still, somehow, none of them were enough. The questions that matter now are not clever. They are simple. Who had the access to make those calls happen that way? Who had the patience to manage them across days? Who had reason to keep a voice alive and then end it? Those answers do not require an extraordinary suspect. They require someone who understood control and understood the geography between one place and another. There are details in the public record that we are not including here, names, specific times, and technical data, because the goal of this film is not to point at a person. It is to hold together the shape of the events themselves. Frauke's absence was made to look like presence by using the phone as a mask. The voice we hear is real. The freedom behind it is not. If you stand in the place where she was last seen and face the direction she would have walked, you can map the ordinary choices a person makes. Street or shortcut, bus or on foot, call now or wait until later. None of those choices look like a mistake while you are making them. They only look like mistakes when you are reading them backwards. In the end, the calls are the feature of the case, but they are not the heart of it. The heart is a person who planned to go home and did not arrive. The heart is a timeline that should be dull and instead is bright with questions. The heart is the final call, and the fact that when it ended, nothing else was allowed to be said. Frauke's story is not a riddle that rewards guessing. It is a set of lines that insist on being read carefully. When you do, you don't find an answer. You find the space where an answer should be, and the echo of a phone, ringing in a room where nobody can see who is holding it. She called after she vanished. That is the fact that explains why this case does not fade. That is the sound that still travels across years. And until the missing parts of the picture are found, the question that followed every call will remain the last word in the story. Why?